Middle-earth. It is a land of wide empty spaces, of ruins and barrows, of fading memories and lost peoples. It could be post-Roman Britain, and the traveller, an Anglo-Saxon invader, tracing the fingerprints of a faded glory. Instead, it is Middle-earth, a continent rapidly becoming post-elf, and it is a land full of curious questions. Hello, and welcome to the We Listen by Night podcast, and in this episode we will explore certain aspects of The Lord of the Rings, a book that is a firm favourite of mine. The Tolkien legendarium is vast, but here we will approach Middle-earth as readers of a book rather than as someone steeped in the lore. In a sense, we are pagans in a Christian land, and this metaphorical journey may involve a degree of mad rambling on my part. We will consider aspects of the landscape of Middle-earth, of the hobbits and the orcs, the question of diversity versus homogeneity, and then ask, is the final chapter, the Grey Havens, a dream? Middle-earth is not the world of Tolkien. That world is Arda, and Middle-earth is only a part of it. Originally, it was a flat world, but it was then made spherical, which I imagine would have been traumatic for anyone living there. The Misty Mountains run in a line reminiscent of a range formed by an old fault line, like the Andes or the Pyrenees and the Alps. With a very low Anduin River valley to its immediate east, we might be forgiven for supposing the Misty Mountains are formed through one tectonic plate, a western continent, riding over another, an eastern continent, which is being pressed down. There is a deep chasm beneath the bridge of Khazad-dûm, like a crack in the surface of the world. Bilbo's own journey under the mountains, during which he encounters Gollum, also suggests vast cave systems and deep places. We might expect such a fault to develop if Beleriand to the west can sink. I've probably mispronounced that. What can I say? I've never heard it spoken. I've only ever read it. It had the Blue Mountains to its east, part of which survived the end of the First Age. In the real world, a mountain formed from a fault would take millions of years to develop, yet the geography of Arda does not move so slowly, and so perhaps the fault line was formed by the transformation of Arda from a flat disk to a sphere. Or perhaps I'm just overthinking all this. Let's move on. Picture Middle-earth. Yours and the reader's imagination concerning distances might be influenced by the Peter Jackson films. This is not to say that I dislike the film adaptations, far from it. I think they're very good. I saw The Fellowship of the Ring at what was then the ABC Cinema on St Giles, Oxford, a few doors down from the Eagle and Child pub. The audience was pro-Tolkien, as you might expect. There was a hushed and appreciative silence throughout the screening, except when Aragorn took the head off the big Uruk-hai, at which point there was a round of applause. That first film will always be the best of the trilogy, but for many, Middle-earth looks like what we see in those films. Their influence is deep, but consider this as an example. From the citadel on the uppermost circle of Minas Tirith, there is a 700-foot drop to the city's main gate. Imagine you are standing there. Below you are the lower circles of the city, full of houses, inns, workshops, courts, barracks, stables. Much of it is light grey stone, and it catches the sunlight, making Minas Tirith bright, like a shining beacon of civilization on the edge of a dark world. To the southeast, we see the hills of South Elithian, called Emin Arnon. Now we face east, and all the Pelennor is before us. It is a land of farms, barns, byres, and fields. 5 leagues away is the river Anduin. A league is by tradition about 3 miles, so the river is a good 15 miles away, as is Osgiliath, seen by Pippin as he, like you, gazes over what is destined to be a battlefield. He lifted his eyes above the river, and it seemed to him that all he could see was a vast and threatening shadow. Perhaps it was the mountains looming on the verge of sight, their jagged edges softened by well nigh 20 leagues of misty air. Perhaps it was but a cloud wall, and beyond that again a yet deeper gloom. Instead of the dark cliff faces of the Mountains of Shadow we see in the Peter Jackson films, the walls of Mordor are further off, 60 miles, even when viewed from 700 feet up. At sea, the distance to the horizon from 700 feet above sea level would be about 32.5 miles. But the Anduin Valley is not the sea, but land, and the land is not flat. Yet 32.5 miles is still 32.5 miles. The Mountains of Shadow would be barely visible, a shadow on the horizon as Tolkien described it, not a great wall standing over Osgiliath. But I suppose the films had to take a little artistic license to increase the sense of looming threat. The films also have the hobbits pretty much living on top of one another, rather like modern Britain. Watch the films, specifically when Gandalf rides through the Shire at the beginning, and Frodo and company return at the end. There is too little space between the hobbit houses, whilst the book implies a Shire with more elbow room. And incidentally, how is it Samwise recognises Merry and Pippin have been in the farmer Maggot's crops, when as seen earlier he claimed to have reached the furthest point from home he had ever been? Did the old gaffer at some point in the past stand him at that very spot and point out the distant landmarks? Anyway, in the films, the hobbits themselves are, in my opinion, rather too cutesy, which brings me to the question of the true nature of those hobbits. The Hobbits. Appendix F, and particularly its second part, on translation, offers the reader a few interesting things to consider. It turns out, what we have read is not entirely an honest account of the War of the Ring. Tolkien writes about his translating of the Red Book of West March and other sources. Did you know that Samwise Gamgee's real name is Banazur Galbasi, Ban being the shorter form? We have followed his adventures as Sam, but it turns out his real name is Ban. How much of what we read about the hobbits is true? Well, technically none of it's true, because they're fictional characters, but let's imagine they're real inside the book, because technically they are real inside the book, because it's a work of fiction. Anyway, that doesn't matter. At the conclusion of the book, The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins returns home to find the hobbits are auctioning off his private property. This is rather extraordinary. It means that someone in authority has gone into his home and essentially helped himself to everything Bilbo owns and is auctioning it all off. Has Bilbo been declared dead? Where is the body? Are there witnesses to his sudden and unexpected demise? Yes, he left quickly. Yes, he left quickly. Yes, he has been gone a while, over a year. From April 1341 to June 1342 Shire reckoning. 15 months or so. But is this long enough? After all, Lord Lucan was gone for decades before he was finally declared dead. The hobbits clearly can't wait that long. They are keen to get into Bag End and loot the place. What does this tell us about the hobbits? The prologue describes them as unobtrusive and unsophisticated, not liking or understanding anything more complicated than a forged bellows, a watermill, or a hand loom. And as someone who has just this week bought a new phone, I can sympathise. The hobbits are sharp-eyed and quick of hearing, but inclined to be fat. They enjoy simple jests, good tilled earth, and 6 meals a day. Most of them, as we learn in the Scouring of the Shire, do not like lists of rules and restrictions on their way of life. They are anti-bureaucratic like all sensible people. The prologue also confidently states, at no time had hobbits of any kind been warlike, and they had never fought amongst themselves. And Frodo, speaking about Gollum in Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past, says that hobbits don't cheat. Both passages forget the events of the day after Bilbo's birthday party in the previous chapter. This, I suppose, can be forgiven, as 17 years lie between Bilbo's departure and Gandalf's discovery of the true nature of the ring. By the end of the first chapter, A Long Expected Party, we have a slightly different portrait painted of this indomitable people, and it is not as flattering as the prologue. Take the following. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumour that the whole household was being distributed free spread like a wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there but could not be kept out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hall, and others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them or with anything that seemed unwanted or unwashed. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. So they'll have anything they can get their hands on, particularly if it's free. And then there is Lobelia Sackville Baggins, and that's how I'm pronouncing that first name. Lobelia, whatever. A little later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on, and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners, and tapping the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises, after he had relieved her of several small but rather valuable articles that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. So we can add thieving and deception to the character of at least one hobbit, but admittedly that is only one hobbit, and then there is a resort to violence. Then they went round the hall and evicted 3 young hobbits who were knocking holes in the walls of one of the cellars. Frodo also had a tussle with young Sancho Proudfoot, who had begun an excavation in the larger pantry, where he thought there was an echo. But I thought hobbits never fought amongst themselves. Here we have a violent confrontation and property damage. In the Scouring of the Shire, we read that some of the hobbits embrace the new Shire order of Lotho and Sharkey. Indeed, they embrace it with enthusiasm. For example, Ted Sandyman, cleaning the mill his father had once been master of. He is an example of the slave mentality of some people. Why be the master when you can be the slave? So, who are the hobbits really? Far from being the cutesy, simple-minded, friendly people we might expect, they seem quick to steal, violent, and not too keen on respecting the private property of others. Bilbo's speech. As we are on the subject of hobbits, let's consider Bilbo's speech, or rather a particular statement. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. Right, what does this mean? There are 2 sentences here. First, I don't know half of you half as well as I should like. Second, I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. I don't know half of you half as well as I should like. So, of those present in the big tent, 50% of them are not well known to Bilbo, and he would like to know them better. This first sentence is straightforward enough. It's the second sentence that's the problem. I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve. So, of the other 50%, there is a portion he does not like, and of those, he feels he should dislike them more than he does. Or does he mean that he feels he should like them more than he does? There's a degree of ambiguity here, but I'm increasingly certain the former is the case. Bilbo feels he should dislike a portion of the gathered assembly more than he does, and so he's being generous. The orcs. Now we turn to the orcs. Interestingly, the word orc may be connected to zombies, as the Anglo-Saxon word used in Beowulf, orcneus, from where we get orc, apparently meant demon corpses. Given their taste for man-flesh, perhaps this should not surprise us. We get a good look at the orcs in the 2 towers, particularly in Book 3, Chapter 3, the Uruk-hai, and then Book 4, Chapter 10, the choices of Master Samwise. In the latter, we get a conversation between 2 orcs, Shagrat and Gorbag. One is from Minas Morgul, the other is from the tower whose name I cannot pronounce. Here is an example of how they speak.
Hola, Gorbag. What are you doing up here? Had enough of war already?
Orders, you lubber. And what are you doing, Shagrat? Tired of lurking up here? Thinking of coming down to fight?
Orders to you. I'm in command of this pass. To speak civil. What's your report?
After this exchange, the 2 groups of orcs discover Frodo's inanimate body and hurry off with him. Into Shelob's tunnels they go, and then along their access tunnel, what they call the Underway. Sam overhears Gorbag and Shagrat the two orc leaders chatting.
Can't you stop your rabble making such a racket, Shagrat?
Let the lads play. No need to worry about Shelob for a bit, I reckon.
We get an insight into the attitudes of the orcs behind the scenes.
Those Nazgul give me the creeps, and they skin the body off you as soon as look at you, and leave you all cold in the dark on the other side. But he likes them. They're his favourites nowadays, so it's no use grumbling. I tell you, it's no game serving down in the city.
We also learn that they have dreams of their own.
I'd like to try somewhere where there's none of them, but the war's on now, and when that's over, things might be easier.
It's going well, they say.
They would,
Grunted Gorbag.
we'll see. But anyway, if it does go well, there should be a lot more room. What do you say? If we get a chance, you and me'll slip off and set up somewhere on our own with just a few trusty lads. Somewhere where there's good loot, nice and handy, and no big bosses.
I have always liked the underway conversation. Gorbag and Shagrat come across as rather ordinary working class fellows. Criminal types, yes, and not intellectual or refined by any means, but people with their own fears and their own hopes. Gorbag wants to slip away from it all with a few trusty lads and no big bosses. He wants his independence. And yes, he wants to steal and cause trouble, but he has no great ambition other than swag and more swag. Gorbag again.
Who cut the cords she'd put around him, Shagrat? Same one as cut the web. Don't you see that? And who stuck a pin into her ladyship? Same one, I reckon. And where is he? Where is he, Shagrat? You may well put your thinking cap on, if you've got one. It's no laughing matter. No one has ever stuck a pin in Shelob before, as you should know well enough.
Later, in Book 6, Chapter 2, The Land of Shadow, we get an exchange between two different types of orc. The first a tracker of some sort, armed with a bow, and described as a small breed, black-skinned, with wide and snuffling nostrils. His companion is a big fighting orc, and he bears the token of the eye. The two are trying to hunt down Frodo and Sam, and they're grumbling and arguing.
First they say it's a great elf in bright armour, then it's a sort of small dwarf man, then it must be a pack of rebel Uruk-hai, or maybe it's all the lot together.
Ah,
Said the tracker.
They've lost their heads, that's what it is. And some of the bosses are going to lose their skins too, I guess. If what I hear is true, tower raided and all, and hundreds of your lads done in, and the prisoner got away. If that's the way you fighters go on, small wonder there's bad news from the battles.
Who says there's bad news?
Shouted the soldier.
Ah, who says there isn't?
That's cursed rebel talk, and I'll stick you if you don't shut it down, see?
Their language is that of the British working class, and they read as if coming from down London way, or rather London as it was, not as it is. That's well sick, innit? It is a curious thing to note, particularly given the fashion for supposing the orcs to be a racist stand-in for black people. If this is true, then why do they sound so British and so working class? Perhaps instead of calling Tolkien a racist, they should call him a snob. But many intellectuals who turn their noses up at Tolkien probably view the British working class as orcs anyway. I have lived at Oxford, and I was struck by the chasm between town and gown. On the one hand, there were the beautiful colleges and old buildings, and intellectuals, the dreaming spires, and the sense of money. On the other hand, there were the drug addicts, the poverty, the feral children, people exposing themselves on the streets at night, they may have been students in all fairness, and balls of excrement pushed through one's letterbox. Yes, that did happen to me. The tension between town and gown in Oxford has a long history. But in such an environment, an Oxford don, steeped in intellectual pursuits, might well find himself writing his antagonistic orcs as belonging firmly to town rather than gown. Or perhaps their dialect reflects Tolkien's own experiences during the First World War. Diversity versus homogeneity. Another aspect of Middle-earth is the question of diversity versus homogeneity. The idea that the Fellowship and the Free Peoples of Middle-earth represent diversity, whilst the Dark Lord and Saruman represents the opposite. This is a very modern interpretation. The truth is somewhat more complex. In one corner, we have the Free Peoples of Middle-earth. In the other, we have Sauron and those he has enslaved. And in the pockets around the edge, we have independent actors. On one side, we have represented wizards, hobbits, dwarfs, and elves. But from the point of view of a reader, specifically one judging The Lord of the Rings as a single fantasy story, the elves can be divided into 3 groups: those in Rivendell, those from Mirkwood, and those in Lothlorien. Men are also represented, and we can divide them into the Dunedain, the men of Rohan, the men of Gondor, and the wild men of Druidan Forest. We can further add the Ents, the ghost army of Dunharrow, and the Eagles. So, 13 groups. Tom Bombadil is an ally of sorts to the hobbits, although independent of the Fellowship. The men and hobbits of Bree are also helpful, but they too are independent of the Fellowship. But we can suppose a total of 15 all told. On the other side, we have represented Sauron himself, the Ringwraiths, a wizard, a black Númenórean in the shape of the voice of Sauron, the orcs of Isengard, Minas Morgul, the Misty Mountains, and Mordor itself, as well as the more recently appeared and sunlight-resistant Uruk-hai. There are also men, the Hardradim, the Corsairs of Umbar, the Men of Rhûn, and the Men of Dunland, a minimum of 4 groups of men. There are also cave trolls and of course wolf riders, so 15. The Balrog, Shelob, the Barrow-wights, and Gollum are antagonists, although independent of the Dark Lord. But let's throw them in the ring, making 19 in total. So a minimum of 15 on the side of good, and a minimum of 19 on the side of evil. And this is a conservative count, as I've probably left someone out. Given the diverse natures of all involved, and that diversity lies on both sides, I think it unlikely Tolkien was trying to give us a message about diversity, at least in the modern sense. It should be noted that Gandalf, Saruman, Sauron, and the Balrog are all Maiar, although from the point of view of the casual reader, they are 2 wizards, a Dark Lord, and a demon of the ancient world. We might add horses, in the shape of Shadowfax, to the side of good, but Mordor also has horses. They also have their fell beasts of the air and Oliphants. And so, with all this in mind, we can probably say the diversity versus homogeneity theory, although interesting, is not necessarily sound, at least in my opinion. Cruel Hadradim. What makes The Lord of the Rings rich and interesting are the many references to places, people, and history we do not get to see, at least not in detail. What lies beyond the confines of the Tolkien map? The Middle-earth we read about is only a Europe-sized part of a greater world. Harad is very intriguing, and I've always wanted someone to wander down into those lands and have a look around. It's rather like the Forsaken Inn. We don't get to see that either. Tolkien clearly has a degree of sympathy for these men from the south. Witness Samwise's thoughts on the dead Haradim in Book 4, Chapter 4 of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit. He was glad that he could not see the dead face. He wondered what the man's name was, and where he came from, and if he was really evil of heart, or what lies or threats had led him on the long march from his home, and if he would not really rather have stayed there in peace. It's a beautiful passage, and I was pleased to hear it spoken in Peter Jackson's adaptation. There is, however, this question of moral geography, a question raised by academics and commentators. The idea that those people from the north and west in Middle-earth are good, whilst those from the east and south are evil. By this logic, the Haradrim, being from the south, must be evil. I think this is an oversimplification. There are morally questionable characters in the north. Consider Harry the Gatekeeper, Bill Ferny, Lotho, and remember the Witch King of Angmar had his kingdom in the north. And consider the passage from Of Herbs and Stewed Rabbit just quoted. At the end of the day, if you are writing a fantasy tale inspired by history, then it will reflect that history. If you live in Europe, then land invasions come from the east and the south. Witness current fears over a mass invasion of Europe by Russia. Rather unlikely, but it does illustrate the obsessions and madness of our elite classes. And if your fantasy world is very loosely based on Europe and Anglo-Saxon mythology, then the threat, the enemy, is going to come from the southeast. Does Frodo dream of Grey Havens? Is the final chapter a dream? In the Grey Havens, the wreck of the Shire Frodo knew and loved is salvaged, damage repaired, mess cleaned up, prisoners freed, trees planted, and great stores of food and drink discovered, making the Yule time of 1419 one of good cheer. A malorn tree is predicted, and children are born with blonde hair, a rarity in the Shire. Consider a few of the passages from that final chapter. Spring surpassed his wildest hopes. His trees began to sprout and grow, as if time was in a hurry and wished to make 1 year do for 20. Time seems to move more quickly, and a strange magic hangs in the air. Altogether, 1420 in the Shire was a marvellous year. Not only was there wonderful sunshine and delicious rain in due times and perfect measure, but there seemed something more, an air of richness and growth, and a gleam of a beauty beyond that of mortal summers that flicker and pass upon this Middle Earth. There is a lot of wish fulfillment in this final chapter, with the damage inflicted on the Shire by Saruman being repaired quickly and even triumphantly. Yes, there is the dust of Galadriel tossed into the air by Sam, dust with magical properties, but is this enough? The fruit was so plentiful that young hobbits very nearly bathed in strawberries and cream, and later they sat on the lawns under the plum trees and ate until they had made piles of stones like small pyramids or the heaped skulls of a conqueror. And no one was ill, and everyone was pleased, except those who had to mow the grass. The year after the scouring of the Shire, 1420, Shire reckoning, is called the Great Year of Plenty in the chronology. Even the beer was awesome. The North Farthing barley was so fine that the beer of 1420 malt was long remembered and became a byword. Is this chapter a dream dreamt by Frodo? Has the hurt of seeing the Shire ruined been too much for him? The language, as you have heard, is very optimistic. Tolkien is really laying it on with not so much a trowel but a bulldozer. Saruman tried to stab Frodo near the end of the preceding chapter, but his blade was turned by the mail coat Frodo was wearing. But what if he succeeded? What if Frodo was fatally wounded and the chapter of the Grey Havens is a feverish dream carrying him to those white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise? I'm not being entirely serious when I suppose the final chapter is a dream, but we might interpret the Grey Havens in such a manner, if the Lord of the Rings perished and only fragments survived. Concluding remarks. This is a long podcast episode, at least for me, and I have barely scratched the surface of this subject. I do envy those people who can sit in front of a microphone and talk and talk. It has never been my jam or my marmalade. I suppose I could just have some AI software do it for me, but then you learn nothing by having AI do it for you. So here I am, and I think I've done reasonably well. Anyway, we have considered aspects of the landscape of Middle-earth, of the nature of both the hobbits and the orcs, the diversity versus homogeneity question, and wondered if the final chapter, The Grey Havens, is a dream. If you've made it this far into this episode, then well done, or perhaps you've fallen asleep. At any rate, I thank you for listening to these ramblings, and if you liked it, goodness knows why you would, but let's imagine for the sake of my ego that you did, then have a look at my other episodes, or check out my videos, and subscribe to my channel, We Travel by Night.